Having never seen the original 80s movie, but loving sword and sorcery as a genre, the 2025 Red Sonja movie caught my attention, but does it successfully scratch my nerdy itch? I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. The IMDb synopsis for Red Sonja, the 2025 movie, reads, an adaptation of the comic book Red Sonja, a vengeful warrior known as a she-devil with a sword. That seems like an incomplete sentence. Anyway, what is this animal? Well, in a nutshell, it feels to me like a 90s TV movie, a 90s fantasy TV movie, low budget, direct to TV type stuff. And in more ways than one, it looks almost like a movie that could air on network television without cutting much out, despite, I guess, having an R rating for bloody violence. There's maybe one or two shots that I'm like, okay, that wouldn't make it into the network television. But many times it cuts away instead of actually showing the impactful moment. And that can sometimes be done to really make actually a moment more intense, but that happens when you show the reaction of an actor that kind of gives it some edge, gives it some weight. But that's not happening here. That we're just cutting away, and I guess we see people looking on, but not really reacting in a way that gives the moment some punch. So it's lacking edge, it's lacking punch, it's lacking, for me, reason for emotional investment. And a lot of that has to do with the story and kind of like being spread thin in its focus, and also feeling a bit inconsistent in some ways, at least in terms of like the motive of the character and what is supposed to be driving my connection to Red Sonja and wanting her to succeed. And other things that make it difficult for me are related to sort of this fantasy spectrum that I have. Because there are so few fantasy movies that really just lean into fantasy a lot, of the kind that I like, I'm willing to put up with some bad visual effects. I'm willing to put up with some bad stuff. I'm willing to put up with some wooden acting, a script that's not great. But my tolerance is on a spectrum of, on one end, you got bad acting, bad story, but holy crap, they are just unashamedly leaning into dragons and goblins and magic sorcerers and spell effects and all this kind of stuff. Then you've got, on the other end, more of the Lord of the Rings movies type of thing, where like magic is kind of invisible and it's really played down in terms of like how it's presented visually. You might have some magic creatures, but I mean, you don't have purple energy lightning going between two wizards and stuff. You've got two Jedis fighting, essentially is what it looks like. But you've got a strong script, you've got great performances, you've got this emotional weightiness to it. And unfortunately, that is almost always the nature of this spectrum. That like, it is so rare, I can't even think of one off the top of my head right now, but it's so rare when a movie leans into all kinds of nerdy fantasy concepts, putting them on display, giving me all that nerdy spectacle and lore and setting of the world and stuff, and also gives me like some weighty performances, a solid, strong script, a reason for me to be invested emotionally. That is so rare to have all those combinations together. So I knew going into this movie, I probably was not going to get like the great acting, but I was hoping that it would lean more into fantasy than it did, and it just didn't. It had fantasy creatures, but I would have, well, there's problems with the visual effects that make that not a selling point. I'll get to that in a minute. But let me talk about Sonja's motivation, because I think if she would have had a more focused, singular motivation driving her, I might have connected to her story more and cared about seeing what happened to her, whether or not she succeeds, those kinds of things. Three motivations that I think are brought into play are the death of her mother, which she's mourning and she wants like vengeance for. Okay, so is that what's driving her? Is that the thing? Or is she a champion of nature and nature's creatures? That's played up also quite a bit at the beginning, and then we come back to that. I mean, to the point like early on where when some creatures get killed by hunters and really in brutal, uncaring ways. So I mean, like it was morally wrong what they did to these creatures, how they treated them. But her response is okay. She says to her horse, "I'll be back. I'm going to go cut some throats." And I'm like, really? We're jumping straight to killing these people because they were cruel in the way they hunted these animals? That's getting into the territory of like elevating the worth of an animal to the worth of a human being. Yes, there should be severe consequences for the brutal killing of animals. If it's done inhumanely, if it's done in a way that's very painful to them, those kinds of things. If it's not done, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. There are certainly legitimate reasons for animals to die for the benefit of human beings. So I'm not falling into the camp of not saying that, but I mean, really, are we going to jump to the death penalty when an animal is killed in a totally cruel way? The death penalty, huh? So it's a little bit odd there. Now, once she gets into the mix of things, before she really starts cutting throats, well, we do have some humans that are definitely in danger. So I was thankful that, like, okay, it's not relying on my agreement that, like, okay, we got to go cut some throats because of the cruel way that these animals were killed. Anyway, so she's kind of a champion of nature, but then there's also this aspect of, like, her loneliness. She doesn't have a people. She longs to have a people. And I think if any of these three would have been focused on more, maybe even the nature one, I think I would have been able to be on her side a little bit more, want her to succeed, root for her a little bit more. But there was just, I think one of these could be the focus for a trilogy, one for each in a trilogy of Sonja movies. But trying to touch on all of them, trying to make them all be what's driving her, I guess, in this movie, it left it too unfocused for me. Now, the action is frequent in Red Sonja, but I found it uninteresting because it lacks realism or impactful violence. Like I said, they cut away a number of times. The fight choreography, we'll get into that in a second. But so it is action-y, but the action I didn't find satisfying. Let me briefly talk about the cast before I get into action, visual effects, stuff like that. The script is not one that is meant to leave the movie as a performance-driven affair for the actors. The actress playing Red Sonja, for example, she delivered the emotional beats that were called for immediately in each moment, but she never drew me in with her performance. Would she be capable of that? I don't know. Maybe in another script under another director, but I wasn't seeing that potential in this movie. And because of that, given the visual effects not being good, the lack of magic as part of the visual spectacle, I would prefer that they just cast more of a stunt woman type character or actress or performer that, like, isn't expected to be a great actor, but man, they can really move their body. They can learn fight choreography, interesting fight choreography quickly, so that even on a smaller budget, we can get some cool moments shot. That's what I would prefer. Just fine. Lean into the it not being an acting vehicle, and instead give me better fight scenes. But and performers that can pull that off under limited constraints, and that just didn't seem to be the case here. So let me talk about the visuals, the world, what it looks like, how it comes across. The costuming in one area in particular is something that's confusing to me. It's a moment of inconsistency. They put her in a chainmail bikini, which I think that was part of the original. I've maybe seen like a cover for the 1980s movie, but I never saw it. But that was certainly a thing of like 80s, and prior to that, sword and sorcery, which I'm fine with leaving that behind. I think many people are. And they even kind of, but maybe they felt beholden to, like, this is a classic character. She's expected to have the chainmail bikini look. They give her a modified version of it that covers more and looks a little more practical. It's still not near as practical as, like, it should be for her to actually go into battle. But the first one is, like, just obviously ridiculous in terms of its ability to protect. And they mention that. And by calling it out, I feel like and calling out the fact that this is being forced on her to fight in the arena wearing this for the entertainment of the audience. And so we're meant to see that as bad. That is objectifying to her, that is humiliating to her or to any woman that would be forced to wear this. We should agree that that is bad. And yet, the camera still slow pans her in it twice. Clearly, in my mind, an objectifying move on the part of the filmmaker. So I'm like, what's going on? Are you just unaware? Sometimes I feel like there's objectifying going on that even the filmmakers are unaware of, because we live in such a hypersexualized culture that they're just numb to these kinds of devices. But yeah, it was a weird, inconsistent kind of element in the movie. Okay, the CG creatures. There's a number of them. Conceptually, some of them are kind of cool, but they look fake. And I would much rather, if you know you're going to work with a budget that's not going to leave a realistic impression on the audience, I would much rather they conceptually go a different route, specifically the route of magical energy. When I see a living creature, that is one of the most easily identifiable fake things in a movie, a CG living creature, person, something like that. If you got a vehicle, something that's metal, something that's supposed to move in an artificial manner, then that works better. And in this kind of situation, man, just have magical energy, because I got nothing to compare that to. I don't see magical energy when I'm going to the grocery store. So you could just make your magical energy and I'll be like, cool looking magical energy, you know? And then I could just throw myself into the dorkiness of the fantasy and not be thinking, that monster is not there. They are looking at tennis balls. That is a very cartoony looking creature, you know? The lighting also, man, it really highlights the budget by making everything feel very well lit. Even when they're in this underground cave that the slave fighters are being kept in, I'm like, everything is so well lit in here. And it could help the realism of the environment so much if they just wouldn't have everything so clear, like it's being lit up with floodlights that are just off of the camera, you know? Keep me guessing. Let some shadows cover some things. That's going to pull me in and make me feel like this is a real environment instead of one with like clearly lights, like halogen lights all over the place or something. Oh man, a bit of a bummer. Lastly, the fight choreography, for whatever reason, is uninteresting. A lot of it is edited around. So whatever fight choreography there was, maybe they couldn't execute on it very well, and so they have the moment of swinging, and then they cut to a different angle and show the moment of impact instead of really letting me see the performers do the choreography. When there's a lot of editing like that, that's when it starts losing its appeal. I like to see these really cool fight moves, and that just was not like a major factor. There was maybe a couple of shots that are like, oh, that's kind of cool. Oh, that's a cool little moment. But I think a movie like this, to really grab me, when it's lacking all the visual spectacle, the magical energy, all that kind of stuff, they gotta lean into something. Any one of those things, magical spectacle or great fight scenes or a really immersive kind of set environment. But when it's all kind of falling short, that's a bummer. That is a real bummer. Okay, as far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on here that could trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Not really. I mean, the nature of movies that I don't enjoy is that, like, I don't really want to be thinking about them. I'm not really being pulled into their themes because I'm being taken out of the story altogether. But I will say that I found it interesting that the villain, his values in this movie are acquiring power and self-importance through not aesthetic. I read my notes wrong. Through atheistic scientific progress. He's very much against the gods and wants to tell people your gods are all made up. Scientific progress, knowledge. He doesn't say science, but like knowledge. And he's building these machines and stuff, which I wish he was studying dark arcane magic or something like that. No, he's building like machines of some kind, which kind of have a magic-y look to them now and then in some of the visual effects associated with them. But even so, and he's going for this progress, this scientific progress, at the cost of any lives. And so there's something about that. It's like, okay, that seems to put a view of cold atheism in a negative light It seems to also want to value human life, because clearly him disposing of lives for the sake of this progress, that's a bad thing, you know? So that, Scripture would agree that that's not a good worldview. But also, there's this idea that death is nothing to be scared of. There's peace ahead for everyone. Even the most evil person is an idea that comes out by the end of this movie. And so there's not a sense of justice. The philosophical perspective, to me, smells like one that wants an afterlife, has some slight Eastern nature worship vibes that subtly elevate animals to the same worth as humans, wants objective virtues and values to exist objectively, proposes that these things do exist, I think, but neglects real justice or the pursuit of truth as vital parts of the philosophical worldview. And this is where a lot of people are at. We see this a lot, I think, in fantasy fiction in general. This vague spirituality that allows one to hope for objective meaning in life without actually impinging on one's freedom to manufacture their own meaning and live how they want. So it's like, I want the objective meaning, but I don't want to be accountable. I want to just kind of do what feels good to me, what values I come up with and decide are important, those kinds of things. It's not preachy, like it's got a message by any means, but the lack of dramatic focus, I think, can, in this case, I think partially be blamed on the groundlessness of the underlying philosophy, that the more we have these strong values of right and wrong and a cosmic sense of justice, I think the more it serves the drama. And the more we lack those things, the fewer objective convictions there are for the audience to kind of grab onto. That's going to have an effect, a negative effect many times, on the story and my investment in it. Anyway, no idea what your tastes are in TV shows or movies, or movies that feel like TV shows. But if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Spader, skip this one. I mean, only if you are really starving for fantasy that isn't for children should you watch this. And even then, wait for it to be free. It's almost certainly going to be free pretty soon somewhere. Meantime, remind yourself of your top 5 movies like D&D video that you put on YouTube a couple years ago, and the Mythica movies in particular, which are like this one, lower budget, but lean into D&D-ish fantasy vibes like nobody's business. They definitely scratch that itch. So yeah, that's where I would go instead. This one is somehow rated R for strong, bloody violence. I don't get it, but except for maybe one shot in the whole movie. But man, that's baffling. And those are all of my thoughts for now on Red Sonja 2025. I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. Any of that stuff I'm grateful for. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.